Nora Bellamy, 26 years old, sat on the edge of a cracked plastic chair in an all-night laundromat on the south side of Chicago, watching a second pink line bloom across the pregnancy test in her trembling hand while the dryers rattled behind her like a heartbeat that would not stop. Her scrub still smelled like the diner, where she waited tables until 2 in the morning. Her fingers were raw from the cold, and in that flickering fluorescent light, she understood that her whole life had just split into a before and an after. She did not know yet that in exactly 11 days, a woman wearing a coat, worth more than Nora's yearly rent, would sit across from her in that same neighborhood and slide an envelope across the table. Inside it would be a cashier's check for $500,000 and a single instruction: get rid of the baby. Disappear. Never contact my son again. This is the story of what Nora did next. 4 months earlier, Nora Bellamy had never heard the name Adrienne Cole outside of business headlines. She worked 2 jobs, one at a downtown diner during the day and another cleaning offices 3 nights a week, just to keep up with her mother's medical bills after a stroke had left the older woman unable to work. Nora had given up her nursing program in her 2nd year when the bills started stacking higher than she could climb. She told herself it was temporary. Temporary had lasted 3 years. The night everything changed started with a broken elevator. She was cleaning the executive floor of Cole Tower, emptying trash cans and wiping down glass conference tables long after everyone had gone home, when the power flickered and the elevator she needed to reach the parking garage stalled between floors 31 and 32. She pressed the emergency button. Nothing. She called the building's nightline. No answer for 20 minutes. She was not alone. Adrienne Cole, 32, CEO of Cole Industries, had been working late reviewing a merger document when the outage hit, and he found himself trapped in the same stalled car, briefcase still in hand, tie loosened, looking more tired than any photograph of him Nora had ever half noticed on a magazine cover. For 45 minutes, in a box of dim red emergency light, 2 people from opposite ends of the world sat on the floor of a stopped elevator and talked. Not about money. Not about the company. Adrienne asked about her mother. Nora asked why a man who owned half the skyline still worked past midnight instead of going home to someone. He admitted quietly that there was no one waiting. When the elevator finally lurched back to life, something had shifted between them, small and fragile, the kind of thing neither of them could name yet. It became a pattern. He would text her, awkward at first, asking if she was working that night. She would find an excuse to bring coffee to the executive floor. Weeks passed. Dinners in places where nobody would recognize either of them, quiet corners of the city, a rooftop where he showed her the one view of Chicago he actually loved, instead of the one his family photographed for shareholders. One night, on a rooftop 3 blocks from the office where nobody from either of their worlds ever thought to look, Adrienne told her about the year his father died, and the board meeting his mother held the same week, still in her black funeral dress, because grief in the Cole family was a luxury that had to wait its turn behind quarterly earnings. Nora told him about the year her father left, and how her mother had worked 2 jobs. Long before Nora ever learned to do the same, as if the habit had simply been passed down through the women in her family like an heirloom nobody wanted. You're the only person who's ever asked me what I want instead of what I'm worth. Adrienne admitted one night, watching the lights of the city instead of her face. Like the confession was easier that way. You're the only person who's ever made me forget how tired I am, Nora answered. Neither of them said the word love out loud that night. They did not need to. It was already sitting quietly between them, patient, the way real things tend to be. Nora fell for him slowly and completely, the way people fall when they least expect it and have the least room in their life for it. Adrienne fell for her the way a man falls, when he has spent his whole life being valued for what he owns, and finally meets someone who wants nothing from him at all. Neither of them told his family. Adrian kept saying he needed the right moment. Nora, if she was honest with herself, was terrified of that moment too. Then his mother sent him to Singapore for a 6-week acquisition, and somewhere between the time zone gaps and the radio silence that followed, everything unraveled. His calls came less often. Then his number, the one only Nora had, stopped working altogether. She told herself it was the merger. She told herself 100 reasons that were not the truth. She did not know that his mother, Margaret Cole, had intercepted the phone, replaced it citing security protocols during the acquisition, and quietly instructed the new executive assistant that any call from an unlisted Chicago number was to be screened and never pass through. Adrian himself did not fully understand it either, though he sensed something was wrong in those weeks. A certain hollowness in the calendar his mother controlled more tightly than usual, an itinerary that somehow left him no free hour to make a personal call from a hotel room 8,000 miles from home. He blamed the merger. He blamed the time difference. He never once suspected the person he trusted most in the family business had already decided, quietly and without his knowledge, that Nora Bellamy was a problem to be managed rather than a woman his mother might one day have to call family. By the time Nora sat in that laundromat, staring at 2 pink lines, she had not spoken to Adrian Cole in 6 weeks. Nora tried everything a person without money or power can try. She called the main line of Cole Industries and was told Mr. Cole's calendar was fully booked for the foreseeable future. She showed up at the lobby of Cole Tower and was stopped at security, her old cleaning badge deactivated the week before, without explanation. A small cruelty she did not understand until much later. She wrote a letter and left it with the front desk. It never reached him. 3 weeks into the silence, sitting in a clinic waiting room, with her hands folded over a stomach that had not yet begun to show, Nora made a decision that had nothing to do with Adrian Cole's money, or his names. She decided she was keeping this baby regardless of what happened next. Not because she was naive about what raising a child alone would cost her. She had done the math more times than she could count, and the math was brutal. She decided anyway. Because somewhere underneath the fear was a certainty that felt like the only solid ground left under her feet. She did not know that decision had already reached the one person determined to stop it. Margaret Cole did not build her family's fortune by leaving loose threads. When her son returned from Singapore distracted and distant, asking his assistant to try an old number that no longer worked, Margaret grew curious. Curiosity, for a woman like Margaret, always came with an investigator's retainer attached. Within 4 days, she had a folder, a name, an address in a part of the city she had never once had reason to visit, a copy of a positive pregnancy test result pulled, through means she would never disclose, from a clinic's records, and a plan already forming in the calculating quiet behind her eyes. She did not tell Adrian. She told herself she was protecting him, the same way she had told herself that for 32 years. Nora was folding laundry in her small apartment, the same load from that laundromat weeks earlier now clean, and stacked on a chair that doubled as a nightstand, when someone knocked on her door with 3 sharp, precise raps that did not belong in that building. She opened it to a woman in her 60s wearing a camel coat that probably cost more than Nora's entire apartment's furniture combined. Silver hair set in a style that had not moved in decades. Eyes the exact pale blue of her son's, but with none of the warmth Nora had come to know in his. "Miss Bellamy," the woman said, not a question. "My name is Margaret Cole. I believe you know my son." Nora's stomach dropped through the floor. She let the woman in because refusing felt somehow more dangerous than allowing her across the threshold, though she would later wonder if that instinct had been wrong. Margaret did not sit. She looked around the small apartment, the way someone inspects a used car they have already decided not to buy, taking in the peeling paint near the window, the single space heater, the framed photo of Nora's mother on the shelf. "I will not waste your time or mine," Margaret said. "I know about the pregnancy. I know my son is the father. And I know that you have not told him, which tells me you understand, on some level, the position you are in." "I tried to tell him," Nora said, her voice steadier than she felt. He stopped answering. "He stopped answering because I made certain of it," Margaret said, without a flicker of shame. "And I will make certain of a great many other things, Miss Bellamy, unless you and I come to an understanding today." She opened the handbag at her side and withdrew a single envelope, cream-colored, heavy stock, and set it on the small kitchen table between them, like she was closing a business deal, rather than tearing apart a life. $500,000, Margaret said. "A cashier's check, already prepared. In exchange, you will terminate this pregnancy this week. You will sign a simple agreement stating, you will never contact my son again, never speak publicly about your relationship with him, and you will move, quietly, somewhere far from Chicago. Your mother's medical debts, I am told, currently total just under $80,000. This would clear them several times over and still leave you enough to start an entirely new life." Nora stared at the envelope like it was a live animal on her table. "How long have you known?" Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper, still staring at the envelope as though it might move on its own. "Long enough to be thorough," Margaret said. "I know your mother's stroke happened 14 months ago. I know you left nursing school in your second year to cover her care. I know you have exactly $1,100 in a checking account and a credit card 3 months behind. I did not come here to threaten you, Miss Bellamy. I came here to offer you the only realistic exit from a situation that has no good ending for you. You did all that research," she said slowly, "and you still think this is something money can fix." "Everything is something money can fix," Margaret said. "I have watched my son build an empire from the ashes his father nearly burned it down to. In 3 months, we take coal industries public. Every reporter, every analyst, every rival on this earth will be looking for a single crack to exploit. An illegitimate child born to a woman my son met while she was emptying his trash cans is not a crack, Miss Bellamy. It is a canyon. It would not just embarrass him. It would hand our competitors a headline that could cost this family everything we have spent 3 generations building." "So I'm supposed to disappear," Nora said, "so your company's stock price doesn't dip. You are supposed to think about what is actually best for everyone involved," Margaret said, her voice sharpening only slightly, "including that child. Do you imagine my son, raised the way he was raised, groomed since birth for boardrooms and mergers, is prepared to be a father to a baby, with a woman he dated in secret for 2 months? Do you imagine your child's life would be easy, split between 2 worlds that despise each other? I am offering you a clean, dignified exit from a situation that would otherwise destroy you both, slowly, over years." Nora looked at the envelope for a long moment. She would not lie to herself, not then and not later when she retold this story. The number on that check represented everything she had spent 3 years drowning under. Her mother's debts gone overnight. A future that did not require 2 jobs and 4 hours of sleep. It would have been so easy to reach out and take it. "Get out," Nora said instead. Margaret's eyebrows lifted, the first genuine reaction Nora had seen cross her face. "I beg your pardon? I said get out of my apartment," Nora repeated, standing now, her hands shaking but her voice not. "You can take your check and your contract and your $80,000 calculation of my mother's worth, and you can leave. I am not for sale, Mrs. Cole. And neither is my baby. If you have ever been offered something that could have solved every practical problem in your life in exchange for something you were not willing to give up, tell us in the comments what you chose. because Nora's story is only getting started. Margaret Cole did not raise her voice or argue further. She simply picked up the envelope, returned it to her handbag with the same precise motion she had used to remove it, and studied Nora for a long, cold moment. "You will regret this," she said quietly. "Not today. But you will." Within a week, Nora understood exactly what that sentence meant. The diner where she had worked for 2 years called her in on a Tuesday and let her go, citing budget cuts that had never once been mentioned before. Her landlord, who had always been reasonable about late payments during her mother's worst months, suddenly informed her that the building had new ownership and her lease would not be renewed. A friend who worked at a clinic mentioned, carefully, that someone had been asking questions about Nora around the neighborhood, offering money for information about her routines, her family, anything that could be used. Nora was not naive. She knew exactly whose fingerprints were on all of it, even without proof. She sat with her mother one evening, in the small apartment that now had an expiration date stamped on it, and finally told her everything. About Adrian, about the elevator, about the baby, about Margaret Cole's visit, and the $500,000 sitting in an envelope, somewhere in a mansion Nora would never see. Her mother, still recovering slowly from her stroke, speech a little slower than it used to be, took Nora's hand. "You did the right thing," she said. "Whatever comes next, you did the right thing." "I might have just made everything harder," Nora said, tears finally falling after weeks of holding them back. "Harder is not the same as wrong," her mother answered. Nora spent those 2 weeks filling out applications at diners, retail counters, anywhere that was hiring, only to have 3 separate managers call back apologetically to say the position had suddenly been filled, after all. It took her until the 3rd rejection to notice the pattern, and by the 4th, she stopped bothering to hope. She sold the small gold necklace her mother had given her for her 16th birthday, the only thing of any value she still owned, just to cover that month's groceries. She never once let herself reach for the phone to call Margaret Cole and ask for the envelope back. Some nights, that refusal was the only thing she felt proud of. 2 weeks later, with no job, a lease that would not survive the month, and a baby growing inside her that she refused to regret. For even a single second, Nora Bellamy packed the little savings she had left and prepared to start over somewhere Margaret Cole's money could not reach. She never got the chance, because that was the week Adrian Cole finally found out the truth. Adrian had spent 2 months in a fog he could not explain to himself. He told himself the sudden silence from Nora's number meant she had simply moved on, that whatever they had built in that elevator and on that rooftop had been smaller to her than it was to him. It was easier to believe that than to question it, especially with the IPO consuming every waking hour his mother allowed him. The truth arrived through the most ordinary accident. Adrian's new assistant, sorting through months of unfilled records during an office reorganization, found a handwritten letter that had been placed in a drawer instead of a shredder, addressed to him, in handwriting he recognized instantly. It had been sitting there for weeks, delivered and then buried by someone who had clearly been told to make it disappear but had not been able to bring herself to destroy it outright. He read it standing in the middle of his own office, and the version of events he had believed for 2 months collapsed in the space of 4 paragraphs. Nora had written about the pregnancy, about trying to reach him, about his mother's visit, which she described in exact, unflinching detail, down to the exact figure on the check and the exact words Margaret had used, about a canyon and a headline. Adrian did not confront his mother immediately. He drove alone to the address his assistant had pulled from old building security logs, the same apartment building where Nora had once worked cleaning offices at night, and found the unit already half empty, boxes stacked by the door. Nora opened the door and went pale. You found out, she said. It was not a question. I found out everything, Adrian said, his voice breaking in a way she had never heard from him before. The check. My mother. All of it. Nora, I swear to you, I did not know. I would never have let this happen. I believe you, Nora said quietly. But it happened anyway. He looked past her, into the apartment, at the boxes, at the life that had nearly been erased. Are you leaving? He asked. I was going to, she admitted. I didn't think I had another option. Adrian stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and for the first time in his adult life, made a decision without calculating what it would cost the company first. You have an option, he said. Me. Both of us. If you'll still have me. Margaret Cole was reviewing IPO projections in her study when her son walked in without knocking, something he had not done since he was a teenager storming out of one of his father's tirades. $500,000, Adrian said, dropping a printed bank record onto her desk. To make Nora disappear, to make my own child disappear. You did this without telling me. I did it to protect this family, Margaret said, not bothering to deny it. Someone in this family has to think clearly when everyone else is led by feelings. You mean led by love, Adrian said. You wouldn't recognize it if it introduced itself. Something flickered across Margaret's face then, something older and more complicated than the cold composure she usually wore like armor. Do you think I don't know what it costs to lose someone you love to a decision made for the good of this family? She said, quieter now. Your father had a woman before me, Adrian. Before the merger with the Whitfield shipping fortune made our marriage the only sensible choice for both families. I was the one who was paid to disappear from someone else's life once, a long time before I ever became a Cole. I understand exactly what I did to that girl. I have spent 30 years telling myself it was necessary. I did to Nora Bellamy precisely what was done to me, because it was the only language I ever learned for protecting people I love. The room went silent. Adrian stared at his mother as though seeing her for the first time, calculating matriarch and the frightened young woman she must once have been folding into a single, exhausted person in front of him. That doesn't make it right, he said finally. It makes it worse. You knew exactly what that check would do to her, because you knew what it did to you. Margaret said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, what do you intend to do? I intend to marry her, Adrian said. I intend to raise our child in this family whether you approve or not. And I intend to remind you, Mother, that you may run this boardroom, but you do not own 49% of Cole Industries. I do. My father left me controlling interest the day I turned 30. Something you have conveniently never mentioned to the board. She stood awkwardly in the doorway for a long moment before Nora, exhausted and still furious in places that might take years to heal, nodded her inside. Margaret looked down at the baby for a long time. I was wrong, she said finally, the words clearly costing her something enormous to produce. I have been wrong about a great many things for a very long time. It was not forgiveness. Nora was not ready to give that yet, and she suspected she might not be for a long time. She never told the story to make Margaret Cole a villain in her daughter's eyes forever. She told it so her daughter would understand exactly what her mother had refused to trade her away for, and exactly what it had cost to say no. Nora Bellamy never spent a single dollar of the $500,000 she refused. She built her life instead, on the one thing money had never been able to buy her, a man who chose her over everything he had been raised to protect, and a daughter who would grow up knowing exactly how far her mother had been willing to go to keep her. If you believe love should never come with a price tag attached, and that no amount of money should ever be enough to make someone give up what matters most, subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments what you would have done if you were standing in Nora's shoes.